Is that your actual background there?
No, I was just thinking can I put a blur on this thing?
No, don't leave it. I think it looks great. The fact that you're more cluttered than me looks better.
I don't know.
Okay.
I didn't play with the.
It's a good little outtake, Darren. Yahtzee, here we go. Awesome. Welcome to the Standard Podcast, where we raise the bar, rebuild the culture, and call out the lies or misconceptions that nobody else will. This isn't motivation. This is a movement. And today I'm Thomas Rowe, sitting down with my co-host Aaron Charles, and we're sitting down with Dr. Greg Chick, a data analyst who earned his PhD in higher education from the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Greg's dissertation used cutting-edge quantitative methodology to estimate the impact of NCAA policy on institutions and student loan debt. But what makes Greg unique is that he's taken his academic research and made it accessible to everyone through his free weekly newsletter, NILnomics, where he analyzes college sports finances through deep research and straightforward visualization. Greg is pulling back the curtain on college athletics finances, NIL economics, and the policies that shape student athletes' financial futures. If you want to understand money behind college sports and how it impacts athletes, families, and institutions, Greg is the person breaking it down with data and not hype. We're diving into the truth behind what it really takes to build identity, discipline, and legacy in sports and in life. Let's get into it. Greg, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Let's start here. You earned your PhD studying the impact of NCAA policy on student loan debt, and now you've published NILnomics, a free newsletter breaking down college sport finances. Why don't you get into a little bit about that newsletter, and also what does raising the standard mean to you in the work you're doing?
Sure. So the newsletter is my attempt to continue my studies. You know, you spend 10 years on a dissertation. You don't want to just let it go when you graduate. So I've tried to continue my rigorous data analytic, research into the finances of college athletics. And I thought by publishing a weekly newsletter, I could reach a broad audience and connect with people that are interested in the finances and the economics of college athletics. So that's really the broad goal of the newsletter. And as far as raising the standard, I just think that there's a gold rush in college athletics now that student athletes are able to monetize their name, image, and likeness. And though it's long overdue for student athletes to be able to do that, to earn payments and money for their NIL, I do think that there's good actors and bad actors that enter the space. For every opportunity that goes well, there's going to be some that end poorly. And we need more people in this space that have the right values, the right ideas, and the student athlete's interest at heart.
Awesome. And what would you say is the biggest lie you feel the culture of college sports industry sold athletes, families, and fans about money, NIL, and how college athletics really work financially?
Sure. I think people get trapped by the headlines, and they see certain student athletes in the college space make millions of dollars in endorsements and commercials and everything else. Or now that they're getting paid by the schools, that they're making millions of dollars in revenue share payments, which is great. It is long overdue, but I think student athletes and their parents misunderstand exactly what the marketplace looks like. Open Doors has released a lot of data and released a lot of reports that show what the median NIL deal is worth, and it's under $1,000. So I think people are misconstruing that just because some student athletes at the very, very top of 1% are making millions of dollars in revenues, that their swimmer or their track and field player, or their soccer player, or even another D1 player, maybe on a lower tier team, is going to make millions and millions of dollars. And
Sure.
I think some student athletes and parents are missing the point that the likelihood of anyone making that type of money or making it into the professional leagues is infinitesimally small. And so the focus should always be one on getting yourself to that level of being a D1 scholarship athlete, and then getting an education and making connections and setting yourself up for the future after your college athletics career. Because again, it's just not likely that most players are going to make it to that professional level.
No doubt. I mean, that's a big misconception. I think people just focus on the now and don't think about tomorrow or what's in store for them. Your dissertation used cutting-edge quantitative methodology to study NCAA policy. What did your research reveal about what most people don't know about the financial reality of college athletics?
So my dissertation looked at how the change in cost of attendance stipends policy impacted student loan debt. So just to rewind, just 11 years ago now, the idea of offering a $2,000 payment to student athletes was very controversial. I mean, it's funny to think about just a few $1,000s would cause a seismic change and require such politicking and discussion. But in 2015, it was a big deal that the Power Five conferences, and again, that's another funny part is I'm talking Power Five back then when we know it's Power Four now.
Right.
But the idea back then was to offer a $2,000 or $3,000 scholarship that players could get paid in and spend however they want, and that was going to be the end of the world. So first, there was a concern that would impact other students on campus, because basically the financial device to do that for student athletes is also used with other students on campus. And that concern is unwarranted based on my research. Basically, the Group of Five institutions did not go overboard. There was no impact on student loan debt that was forecasted when this policy happened. And so the net effect is, even though I didn't find a statistically significant impact, but based on that policy, which as a quantitative researcher, you always want to find that statistically significant result, I like to reframe my research as kind of one of the very few times we've been able to empirically test the warnings and the concern that the NCAA and those who I would say are against student athlete employment or payments or compensation, I was able to empirically test their concerns. I was basically putting their concerns to the test, and I found nothing. And so, one, it goes to show just 10 years ago that the push to pay student athletes was justified, had no downstream effects. And then it makes you think, here we are in 2026, the same people are pushing to not empower student athletes to earn revenue, to earn money off their name, image, and likeness, not be able to gain all the rights and privileges that other athletes and other spaces have. So that's the large overview of what my research was.
Got it. That's intense, and that's pretty specific. Right now, we're going to turn it over to Aaron for segment 2, Identity and Legacy. Aaron, go ahead and take it away. Oh, so it looks like we're having problems with Aaron's audio, and that's okay. Aaron, or Greg, I'm going to take it from here. You're a PhD, a data analyst, and the founder of NILnomics. But beyond the credentials, who is Greg Chick, and how do you define character, integrity, and discipline?
Well, thanks for the question, Tom. I am a father. I have 3 young children and a 4-legged friend that I take care of alongside my wife. And, my children are just starting to get into athletics. My 6-year-old plays soccer, plays basketball, and it's way too early to tell if that's going to become a passion, if that's going to be something that she thinks and hopes and aspires to be a way to get into college, into maybe she'll dream of being a pro athlete. But, even at this young age, you can see that sometimes there's a lot of pressure on the athletes, on parents to make the most of it, because there's a little bit of FOMO, a little bit of anxiety around doing it the wrong way or making sure they get the most out of this opportunity. No one wants to spend the time and quite frankly, the money at this point in something that isn't going to give the best results. So it just seems a way that people can be taken advantage of. You see all the headlines about private equity entering the youth sports space. Again, there's there's now name, image, and likeness rights being granted to high school athletes. So the pressure and anxiety around athletics is not going anywhere. And I feel like it's starting to trickle down again to the high school level. And even at this stage with my 6-year-old, I'm seeing that pressure trickle down. And to me, I really want to focus with her on what athletics represents to me, which is learning the value of hard work, of integrity, of doing things the right way. I think anyone who's been involved in athletics knows that these type of values of leadership, of teamwork, of hard work, those are values that transcend athletics.
Sure.
And can help people in their lives, either in their jobs, in their family, in their community. I mean, that's what I'm focused on with my children in athletics, and I'm hoping that if she continues to progress in athletics, that those values are still at the forefront of those experiences.
No doubt. No doubt. You could have kept your research behind academic paywalls, but you chose to publish a free weekly newsletter, making college sports finances accessible to everyone. What does legacy beyond the research mean to you?
Great question. I think I've spent 10 years working on this dissertation, and I want to make sure that knowledge gets shared broadly. It's not helpful to me, in my opinion, to have that published in some online library at the college's website. I really wanted to make sure that people understood that the concerns, the disingenuous concerns, I would say, of those against student athlete empowerment, that I've empirically tested those concerns and that they are unwarranted. So I think that's a theme that has value even today as the movement towards student athlete empowerment continues. And also, I think this space is underserved. As more money gets put into the college athletics, I think there's an opportunity for someone who can understand the data, understand how the finances and the accounting works, to break that down and make it simple and make it understandable. That's why all my newsletters have a graph or chart, a visual of some sort. And that's really a big piece of the newsletter, is to explain some of these things in a simple, straightforward way. So I'm hoping to serve that market, that audience that is interested in the behind the scenes, the economics, the accounting, the finances of college athletics.
Awesome. So I have to ask you, we had a conversation with a sports agent last week, and I kept using the expression, the NIL has become the wild, wild west in the transfer portal. And he actually paused for a minute and he said, he thinks it's a race to the bottom. What are your thoughts on that? As far as, is it a race to the bottom, or is it just the new frontier?
It's a good question. I think we overstate how much has changed in some regards. I think for a long time, it's always been the haves and the have-nots,
right?
And those that are trying to keep up with the Joneses. If you look at the history of conference realignment, which has basically been an elaborate rat race between institutions to climb to the biggest, money faucet of television deals. So I don't think much has changed in the grand scheme of things. Schools are still trying to position themselves to acquire the maximum amount of prestige that they can in the college athletic space, just like they do in higher education broadly.
Sure.
I think the big change now is that the student athletes are getting a piece of the pie, and that is uncomfortable for a lot of people, and it's additional expenses that are being brought into the space. But I think now that they're getting paid and that revenue is being shared, there's a more focus than ever on the business of college athletics and how to professionalize and how to draw and generate additional revenues to compensate for those new expenses. So in some ways, it's easy to get cynical and say it's a race to the bottom, but to me, I think it's more of the same, that people are just trying to expand this new space of NIL and player revenue sharing.
Gotcha. So building on that, what's the one truth you wish every student athlete, parent, or coach understood about college athletics, their finances, and NIL that most aren't hearing today?
Sure. I think for me, student athletes and their parents should just focus on the educational opportunity that exists in college athletics. I don't think that's changed. Again, the statistical likelihood that any player entering college athletics is going to make millions of dollars, make it to the professional leagues is near 0%. So if you've made it to a place where you can get an education, where you can take advantage of opportunities at the institution, that should be everybody's focus, because
Sure.
that's more realistic for everyone. I think, with NIL becoming more of a reality, I think athletic departments are focusing a lot on student athlete brand development, marketing, and that just provides more opportunities for student athletes to network, to get internships, get employment opportunities. So I do think there's more opportunities for student athletes than ever before, but the focus should always be on education and what opportunities can come up after their education ends.
Perfect. That's a great segue into segment 3, which is advice across stages. So if you could sit down with a high school athlete and their family who are navigating recruiting and NIL offers, what do they need to understand about the financial side that nobody's telling them?
Well, the first thing I would say is get representation, because going back to one of the earlier questions, there's a lot of bad actors in the space, both in the agent space, both in the brands that are trying to do some of these deals, and some of the schools that are writing these contracts. It can't be said enough that student athletes, if they're in a space to do some type of brand deal, they should get some type of representation.
No question.
And
No question.
then as far as what they should be focused on is, don't do anything that's going to draw away too much from what the focus should be, which is your craft. At the high school level, there are so many recruits for so many sports. The opportunity window is so small. You want to focus on being the best student athlete that you can be, both in the classroom and on the court or on the field. And those opportunities will be there regardless. They're a nice benefit. I don't want to negate the benefit that NIL presents for student athletes, but again, the focus should always be on education and maintaining your performance on the field.
Awesome. And what about the college athletes who are currently in the NIL era? What should they know about evaluating deals, understanding their net worth, and protecting their financial future?
Sure. I think this is one of the real positives that we've seen. I think a lot of college athletic departments are investing in resources, both personnel and staff, and third-party services to help educate student athletes. I think really financial literacy in this country, or in the high school space and college athletic space, is poor. But I think there's been a recognition of that. I think financial literacy is crucial. It's not part of any official curriculum, but I think college athletics is starting to understand that they need to play a role in that. So I would really push for any current college student athlete to really invest the time in developing your own financial literacy. It will pay off dividends both during your college career and afterwards. And then, as far as trying to understand, your value and trying to make sure that you maximize any opportunities that you have, I would just say, work with your staff at your school. The athletic departments want you to be able to maximize your opportunity. We're seeing a lot of schools invest in marketing staff and NIL content creation. I think a lot of athletic departments want to work with their student athletes and maximize their exposure, because not only is it good for the student athlete, but it pays off for the school to be able to market that to the next generation and the next year's class. So it's mutually beneficial. And, I think taking advantage of those resources is in everyone's best interest.
Right. No question. What about for athletic departments, coaches, and administrators? What do they need to understand about the financial realities of NIL and the NCAA policy that your data has revealed?
Yeah, I think athletic departments have recognized pretty quickly that they need to play a role. I from the data that I've gathered on college athletic staff, they are investing in hiring staff dedicated to maximizing NIL opportunities, marketing students, helping them develop their brand identities, and network with these brands to make all types of opportunities for sign-ins and autographs and memorabilia. I think college athletics departments understand that pretty well at this point. I would just say, again, a focus on financial literacy, both at the broader college and in the department. I think that would be really beneficial. And then working with the student athletes,
Sure.
creating relationships and making sure that they have the resources they need. I think there's a mix. Some student athletes know what they want to go after, how they want to market themselves, and they have a financial sense of what their value is. But some student athletes, there's a lot of them that just think, well, I'm not a D1 football quarterback. I can't do anything. When,
Right.
You hear tons of stories about, you're a random track athlete partnering with the deli shop down the street and getting free food for the team after every meet. Small
Right.
little things like that unfortunately 10 years ago would have been outlawed. That, what
Sure.
I just suggested for a silly example would have gotten the entire team banned. But, there's just endless opportunities now for teams and players to connect with local businesses that really want to maximize their exposure, in the local community, and would be glad to partner with some student athletes.
Yeah, no question. One of a couple of years ago, well, let me back up a little bit. I think in our initial conversation, my brothers played football at San Diego State in the 90s, and they actually blocked for Marshall Faulk. And I went to the University of Arizona, and coincidentally, San Diego State built a new stadium after they tore down Qualcomm and Jack Murphy Stadium. And they built Snapdragon Stadium for the Aztecs. I think it's about 40,000 seat. But this was I think it was 2022 or 23, where the first game of the season was San Diego State against Arizona. And because of our alumni associations, my brothers and I went to the game. 30 years later, there were college kids in the stands wearing Marshall Faulk jerseys that weren't even alive when he was playing. And he's not getting paid for those jerseys because, he put San Diego State on the map. And then one of the conversations that Mark and Matt and I had, they were offensive linemen. They were big guys. And if this is at San Diego State, imagine what's happening at these other power schools where, if they would have gone to dinner with a booster or alumni, they could have gotten dinged and even suspended. So you're absolutely right on that. Now it's just kind of open the door. So, make it a little more equitable for the athlete as well as for the institution. We're going to turn it over to segment 4, which is the rapid fire round. And Erin gave me the thumbs up. She's back in the game. So Erin, go ahead and take it away.
I am back in the game. Sorry about that, Greg. A little technical issues on my side. So what I want to do is I'm going to start a sentence and I'm just going to have you finish it for me. So discipline equals.
Discipline equals results. I don't think anyone can make anything of themselves if they're not disciplined, because there's always going to be someone who's willing to outwork you, outthink you, outplay you. But if you're disciplined and follow a routine of hard work and focus, results will always happen.
Awesome. Leadership equals.
Leadership equals something to aspire to. I think working hard and putting your best foot forward is always going to get you results. And if you demonstrate that to your peers, I think leadership opportunities will just appear naturally.
Awesome. What about faith? Faith equals.
Faith? Well, I think faith equals a very complex series of calculations. I'm a data analyst by trade, so I generally think I have faith by making an extended amount of research into the data, into what the machinations are of my field, of what the problem I'm trying to solve is, so that I can make the best decision that I can, and have faith that my methodology, that my research questions, that those will drive me to the best result.
That's awesome. What about legacy? What does legacy equal for you?
Legacy to me means that if you work hard, if you do your best, if you put your best foot forward, then the results that you have are immaterial to the feelings that people have about you. I think there's that quote you always hear, that it's not what you say or what you do, but people will always remember how you made them feel. And I think when you go about your business respectfully, working hard, the legacy is that people are going to remember you for those things and how you treat them. So I think your legacy is a result of how hard you work, who you are, and how you treat people.
Awesome. And what's one thing you would never compromise on?
One thing I would never compromise on is respecting people. You know, I see people who get frustrated or who get upset and think that justifies them mistreating people or not treating people with respect. But you know, whether it's the person behind you in line or behind the counter at the grocery store or serving you a coffee or the janitor you walk by in the hallway, I just think I would never compromise the idea of treating every single person as an individual who deserves respect and appreciation for what they do, no matter what their job is. So that's something I never would compromise on.
Awesome. And my last question is, what's one message, if you could put it on a billboard for student athletes and families about NIL and college sports finance, what would your one message be?
I think my message would be focus on the classroom. You know, I from a data perspective, look at the macro picture, and for the median student athlete, NIL is a nice little perk of a few $1,000 if you're lucky. Really, the benefit of being a student athlete is going to be what you learn in the classroom and what you get out of it for your career. So my message to student athletes would be focus on the classroom. The sport will pass you by, but what you learn in the classroom will go forever.
I love that. Yes, kids, focus on your education. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Thomas.
Greg, that's a great way to segue into segment 5, but I want to add to that. It's just what is so frightening to me. We just posted this clip from Dabo Sweeney about, because of the transfer portal and NIL, you have all these athletes jumping ship. You know, they make 3, 4, 5 transfers, and then they're not going to have a college degree or a college degree that's going to be worthless, and they're going to be 30 years old, no real education. The money has run out, and I mean, one of the things Aaron and I deal with is, after the game is over with professional athletes, the depression, the identity crisis sets in. Can you imagine what's going to happen with some of these athletes that have these nice, comfortable 6-figure NIL deals in college, and then when they don't really, and then when they get out of college, as they say they don't play pro sports, we know the probability is small. Then when they have an offer like a $65,000 to $80,000 starting salary, they kind of balk at it.
Yeah, I think some players are going to be ill-suited for their post-athletic career based on some of the decisions they're making. You know, again, I can't stress enough that I think this new world of NIL is a double-edged sword. You know, right. For every story of the Fernando Mendozas or Diego Pavier who are transferring and succeeding at a very high level, there's just an abundance of student athletes who are transferring 4, 5, 6, 7 times bouncing between schools. We all know they're not getting an education, and they're certainly not earning enough revenue that's going to last them the rest of their life. So to me, it's a double-edged sword. Right. I want student athletes to have all the opportunities in the world, but I feel like some are just chasing the bag and not a very big bag for that matter, and not focusing on the education that they can get. I'm here in New England. I'm in just south of Boston, and we hear Tom Brady a lot talk about how much it served him to be on the second, third, fourth string for years.
Sure.
He wasn't a starter until his senior year, and that he credits with, giving him the strength and the drive to succeed and perform at the highest level. And well, look how that worked out for him. And I just think some student athletes are just saying, well, if I don't get playing time, I'm going to go here or there, or it's not working out for me. I'm just going to go somewhere else. And instead of doing the harder route, which is working hard, practicing and being the very, very best that you can be, and earning your way to the starter role on your team. I just think sometimes the temptation to go somewhere where you can start right away it's very tempting for too many student athletes. And besides squandering, their athletic career, I just think that the education piece is lost there too. which is unfortunate. So again, NIL and the transfer rules are a double-edged sword.
No question. All right, Greg, before we wrap up, this is the final segment. Is there something we didn't touch on today that you feel that athletes, families, or college sports fans need to understand about the financial side or pitfalls of college athletics and NIL?
Well, like our discussions kind of displayed here is not only is this new space a little bit of the Wild West, that everything has a good side and a bad side. I think there are good actors, there are bad actors. So it's exciting because there's so many new opportunities for student athletes. I mean, I'm very happy to see that they are getting those opportunities, but I think there's just as many opportunities for things to go bad, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So surrounding yourself with people that have your best interests at heart, that make good decisions, focusing on what education you're going to get and what career opportunities you can generate in your education career. I think those are going to serve you a lot more than trying to become, a pro athlete or trying to get the $1 million NIL deal. I think focusing on those things will serve student athletes better.
Awesome. So Aaron got you on the rapid fire round. I'm going to put you in the hot seat. According to Greg, the world of Greg, top 3 sports movies of all times.
Oh, now we're talking about really important things. Great. I love hockey. That's my favorite sport. So Miracle has to be number 1.
Yep.
Number 2, I would just say the entire Mighty Ducks series.
Okay.
I'll just put them all together as one. We can debate which one's the best. Obviously, it's the second one. And, just to give some credence to college athletics, I mean, I just love Rudy. I'm a sucker for it every time.
Sure.
Great movie.
Yeah. I'm going to give you my 3, but sometimes when we talk to athletes nowadays, we have had this one athlete that was hell-bent on going to Notre Dame, wanted to be a fighting Irish since, for as long as you can remember. And I said, okay, do you want to be Rocket Ismail or do you want to be Rudy? And they looked at me like I had 3 heads. And I was like, never mind. Okay. So you're going to need to do your research on that one. So, yeah, I agree with you on Miracle. Miracle's number 1 for me. 2 is Rocky and 3 is Hoosiers. And then, you could pretty much an honorable mention. You could put any one of Costner's movies in there from, Field of Dreams to Bull Durham and so forth. Okay. Greg, where can people connect with you, whether that's on social media, a website, or your email? And we'll also put these in the show notes, but I want them to hear from you.
Sure. Appreciate it, Tom. You can find the newsletter online at NILnomics, NILnomics.com. I post regularly on X and Twitter at NILnomics, and sometimes under my own name as Greg Chick, PhD, GregChick, PhD. So you can find me there.
Awesome. Dr. Greg Chick, thank you so much for sharing your story and your truth. Team, if this conversation challenged you, inspired you, or made you think differently, let's share it. Send it to a student athlete navigating NIL, a family trying to understand college sports finances, a coach or administrator making financial decisions on behalf of the institution, the team, or the athlete. This is the Standard Podcast, and this movement only grows when we raise the standard together. Talent fades, but truth endures. Let's raise the bar, let's rebuild the culture, and let's become the standard. We'll see you next time. Greg, thank you so much. Aaron, thank you so much. You guys have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Awesome.